How about that? All right, so we've got 43 verses. You ready? This is going to be a while, and there's a lot of names, so you're going to have to trust me on the pronunciation of the names. So buckle up, here we go. Genesis 36, starting in verse 1. Now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan, Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite, and Basemeth, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nebajoth. Now Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemeth bore Ruel, and Aholibamah bore Jeush, Jalem, and Korah. These were the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle, and all his animals, and all his goods which he had gained in the land of Canaan, and went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. And this is the genealogy of Esau, the father of the Edomites in Mount Seir. These were the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, the son of Adah, the wife of Esau, and Ruel, the son of Basemeth, the wife of Esau. And the sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kenaz. Now Timnah was the concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. These were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. These were the sons of Ruel, Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mitzah. These were the sons of Basemeth, Esau's wife. These were the sons of Aholibamah, Esau's wife, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon, and she bore to Esau Jeush, Jalem, and Korah. These were the chiefs of the sons of Esau, the sons of Eliphaz. The firstborn son of Esau were Chief Teman, Chief Omar, Chief Zepho, Chief Kenaz, Chief Korah, Chief Gatam, and Chief Amalek. These were the chiefs of Eliphaz in the land of Edom. They were the sons of Adah. These were the sons of Ruel, Esau's son, Chief Nahath, Chief Zerah, Chief Shammah, and Chief Mitzah. These were the chiefs of Ruel in the land of Edom. These were the sons of Basemeth, Esau's wife. And these were the sons of Aholibamah, Esau's wife, Chief Jeush, Chief Jalem, and Chief Korah. These were the chiefs who descended from Aholibamah, Esau's wife, the daughter of Anah. These were the sons of Esau, who is Edom, and these were their chiefs. These were the sons of Seir, the Horite, who inhabited the land: Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anah, Dishan, Ezer, and Dishan. These were the chiefs of the Horites, the sons of Seir, in the land of Edom. And the sons of Lotan were Hori and Hemim. Lotan's sister was Timnah. These were the sons of Shobal: Alvan, Manahath, and Ebal, Shepho, and Onam. These were the sons of Zibeon, both Ajah and Anah. This was the Anah who found the water in the wilderness as he pastured the donkeys of his father Zibeon. These were the children of Anah: Dishan and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah. These were the sons of Dishan: Hemdan, Eshban, Ithran, and Cheran. These were the sons of Ezer: Bilhan, Zavan, and Achan. These were the sons of Dishan, Uz, and Aaron. These were the chiefs of the Horites: Chief Lotan, Chief Shobal, Chief Zibeon, Chief Anah, Chief Dishan, Chief Ezer, and Chief Dishan. These were the chiefs of the Horites according to their chiefs in the land of Seir. Now, these were the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the children of Israel. Bela the son of Beor reigned in Edom, and the name of his city was Dinhabah. And when Bela died, Jobab the son of Zerah and Basra reigned in his place. When Jobab died, Husham of the land of the Temanites reigned in his place. And when Husham died, Hadad the son of Bedad, who attacked Midian in the field of Moab, reigned in his place. And the name of his city was Avith. When Hadad, chief Samlah of Masrekah, reigned in his place. And when Samlah died, Saul of Rehoboth by the river reigned in his place. When Saul died, Baal-Hanan, the son of Achbor, reigned in his place. And when Baal-Hanan, the son of Akbor, died, Hadar reigned in his place. And the name of his city was Pau. His wife's name was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred, the daughter of Mezahab. And these were the names of the chiefs of Esau, according to their families and their places, by their names. Chief Timnah, Chief Alva, Chief Jetheth, Chief Aholibamah, Chief Elah, Chief Pinon, Chief Kenaz, Chief Teman, Chief Mibzar, Chief Magdiel, Chief Iram. These were the chiefs of Edom, according to their dwelling places, in the land of their possession. Esau was the father of the Edomites. One more verse. You're going to get a bonus verse. Chapter 37, verse 1. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. Okay. All right. You're dismissed. No. I think I should get a treat just for saying all those names. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. You're like, what in the world is going on? What's that? I just did it cold. Some of those names were not being said, I think, the same way each time I said it consistently. But anyway, so there you have it. All right. So just a brief recap from last time. We closed off chapter 35, which was, as I said, kind of the end of the story of Jacob. Now we know Jacob will still appear, right? When we get to chapter 37, he's going to be there with his sons and Joseph. You got the story of Joseph and Jacob still there. But Jacob is now, he is a supporting character at this point. The narrative is going to shift to Joseph starting in chapter 37. But what we have here is sort of like a postscript. Because if you remember I don't know how long it's been since we've been in Genesis, but it's been a while. If you remember when we first started, I said the way to kind of structure the book of Genesis, there's two ways to structure it. There's sort of like a superstructure, which is the first 11 chapters are sort of what they call, I forget the word, but it's pre-Abrahamic. It's, sort of, anyway, you've got everything up to Abraham and then Abraham going forward. But there's another structure within the book itself. And every so often, now the New King James doesn't word it exactly the same each way. You might have it more consistently in the ESV. But you get this line that says, and these are the generations of. Does it say that in chapter 36, verse 1? These are the generations. Right, so that's a Hebrew word called toledot. These are the generations. So you see that early on in chapter 2. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when God created the heavens and the earth. These are the generations of Noah. These are the generations of Shem. These are the generations of Abram. Well, we're in that section now that is, these are the generations of Isaac. That was chapter 25, verse 19. These are the generations of Isaac. And it then tells the story of Jacob and Esau. When we get to chapter 37, verse 2, you'll see there, this is, New King James says this is the history, but it's the same thing. These are the generations of Jacob. And now it's going to tell the story of Joseph. So this is a postscript. We are finishing, in a sense, the generations of Isaac. Most of it was taken up by telling the story of Jacob, finding his wives, having the births of his children. But now we're going to sort of look at Esau. We're going to pick up a little bit on Esau as we look going forward. So these are the genealogy, or this is the genealogy of Esau. And this whole chapter serves, as it were, as the genesis of the Edomite people. You're like, well, who are the Edomites? Well, they play a role later on in the Old Testament. The Edomites become their own nation, and they become a people that interact with Israel throughout her history. We'll look at some of that when we get to that point in the lesson tonight. But the narrative here in the first 8 verses talks about the family of Esau. We see his wives, his sons, and I believe maybe even his grandsons at this point. Now, there might be a little bit of confusion with the names of the wives of Esau, because if you were to look at, I believe, chapter 26, verse 34, and chapter 28, verse 9, the names are slightly different. Genesis does that, okay? When you get to Exodus, and when Moses goes into the wilderness and he meets his future father-in-law, he's Jethro, but then he's got another name. It's like sometimes the names interchange. I'm not sure why that happens. I don't really have a clear solution to present, other than sometimes names change in the Bible for people. But the point here, what we see is, as I said, this is kind of tying the bow, if you will, of the generations of Isaac by looking at Esau, the other son that we didn't really pay much attention to, except when Jacob cheats him, and then when they reconcile when Jacob returns. We don't see much of Esau. So obviously here, Esau, not only did he have one wife, he had three wives, right? Two of them were Canaanite wives. And we know that was a problem for his parents. If you remember, it's like Rebekah's like, I can't stand these Canaanite women that Esau has. If Jacob takes a wife from the Canaanites, she was going to pull her hair out or something. So we see his wives, we see his sons. He's got 5 sons, I believe, here that are listed here. But the thing that I really want to pay attention to is, once he has all these children, you see in verse 5, all these children were born in the land of Canaan. So again, this is the land of promise, right? This is the land that God called Abram to. This is the land that he promised to give to him and his descendants. And then when he died, that promise was passed on to Isaac, and it's the same land that he promised to give to Isaac and his descendants. And then when Isaac died, it's the same land that he promised to Jacob to give to him and his descendants. So Esau is living there in the land. But as you see in verse 6, anybody here a fan of the Beverly Hillbillies when they were on? Okay. Well, how does the original, the opening song goes, right? After he struck gold, he packed up his family and moved to Beverly. Well, in a sense, that's kind of what Esau does here. He packs up his family and he leaves the promised land. He takes his wives, he takes his sons, he takes his household, he takes all his possessions, all his cattle, everything, and he leaves the promised land. So that's what verse 6 says. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle, and all his animals, all his goods which he had gained in the land of Canaan, and went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. And then you get the reason there in verse 7. For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. So he moves away to a country away from the presence of the Lord. Now, does that sound familiar when he gives the reason in verse 7? Because there was too many people and not enough land. Does that sound familiar? Lot, right? Yeah. If you remember chapter 13 with Abram and Lot, Abram and his nephew Lot. They had lots of flocks, and they were in the promised land, and the herdsmen began to squabble with one another. So Abram goes to his nephew and says, we're related, so we shouldn't have this squabbling. So you take your pick. If you pick where you want to go, and I'll take the other side. If you go this way, I'll go that way. If you go the other way, I'll swap out. So Genesis 13, now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Uncle, nephew, but close enough. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I'll go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. This is a little parenthetical. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Lot left the promised land for greener pastures, right? And it did not work out well for him, right? He went and dwelt near Sodom, then he dwelt in the gates of Sodom, and then he was actually in the city of Sodom itself, right when the fire started to fall on it, right? Right when God said, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for their wickedness, right? So Lot did not walk by faith. Lot walked by sight. He saw that the plain was very well, it's not well watered anymore, I can tell you that much, but it was very lush. It was like the garden of the Lord. It looked like Eden. He says, I'll take that. And Abram's like, okay, then I'll stay here in the land of promise, which is where the Lord wants me anyway. Well, Esau's kind of doing the same thing, right? He's leaving for greener pastures. He's leaving the land of promise. He's not just going away from the presence of Jacob, he's going away from the presence of the Lord, because the land of promise is a land that it's God's land, really. Well, all of it's God's land, but this particular plot of land is a land that God said, I will give to you, Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. So Esau is making that same mistake that Lot made. He leaves the promised land to dwell in the region of Mount Seir. Now, if you have a Bible map in the back of your book, Bible, Mount Seir, that region where Edom will be, think of, if you could see where the Dead Sea is, it's just a little bit southeast of that. It's pretty much where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be, okay, in that same region. It's just southeast of the Dead Sea, but it's away from the presence of the Lord. Now, as we're going to see in the rest of the lesson, Esau is going to be a case study of a life lived away from God. That is Esau's legacy, a life lived away from God. Everything about Esau's life confirms what the author of Hebrews says of him. You remember when we looked at Esau when he was crying over the lost birthright, the author of Hebrews looks at that passage in Genesis and comments on it when he gets to Hebrews chapter 12 and calls Lot a profane man because he despised his birthright. And everything about Esau's life confirms the fact that he was a profane man. He is leaving the land of blessing, the promised land, and he's, in a sense, then he is leaving the presence of God, because the way to think about the promised land is to think of it as sort of like Eden 2.0, okay? You had the first Eden. That's been, the entrance to that garden has been barred, right, ever since Adam was kicked out. Angels guard the place with a flaming sword. But the promised land is sort of like Eden 2.0. And how do I know this? Because if you think about, in fact, I just read this passage this morning as I was going through my Bible reading plan. If you remember when in Numbers 13 and 14, when they get to the edge of the promised land and Moses sends the spies to go in there and they come back and everything that God promised about the land was true. It was indeed a land flowing with milk and honey. The fruit was, they said the clusters were so big they had to carry them on sticks between two guys. The only problem was there were giants in the land. It was like, and we're like grasshoppers, and they have fortified cities. We'll never be able to take it, except for Joshua and Caleb, who says, let's go at it anyway, right? Let's charge that mountain. So yeah, it was meant to be Eden 2.0. And here, Esau moving to Mount Seir is like being cast east of Eden. Think of Cain. Think of Adam and Eve cast out of the garden, cast away from the presence of the Lord. Every time you move away from the presence of the Lord, you're going east. Remember that directional mindset. If you go east, you're going away from the presence of the Lord, because the entrance to the temple, the entrance to Eden, everything was on the east. So if you're going east, you're going away from the presence of the Lord. And that's where Esau goes. That's where Cain was sent when he was cast out. That's where Adam and Eve were sent, where they were cast out of the garden. So they were being, in other words, they were being cast out of Eden in a sense. Now the church, right, because Israel, as we learned this morning, is a church under age. The church is littered with people who are externally part of the covenant, but ultimately show themselves to be cut off. Esau is externally part of the covenant, right? Because the covenant of circumcision given in Genesis 17, Abram was commanded, circumcise yourself, your children, everyone in your household, everyone bought with money, everyone born in your home. And then that was a practice that was supposed to be carried on from generation to generation. So presumably, Isaac was circumcised, Ishmael was circumcised, Jacob was circumcised, Esau was circumcised. They all received the sign of the covenant. They're all, at least externally, part of the covenant. But as we're going to see later, just because you're circumcised, just because you're a descendant of Abraham, does that make you part of Israel? No, it does not. You can be externally part of the covenant, but show yourself to be cut off. Think of Jesus when he tells the parable of the soils, or the parable of the sower in Matthew 13, right? There's, the seed is the word of God, and the one who casts it is the one who casts the word of God, and there are 4 responses, right? Well, one of them is it hits the hard ground and then it's immediately, eaten by the birds of the air. That's the person who hears the gospel and doesn't believe at all. Then there's 3 responses that at least look positive. One of them really is. The other 2 appear to be positive, but then they wither away and die before they bear fruit. So you've got the one that falls on the shallow soil, and when it takes root, it grows up real fast, but because it can't dig its roots deep, when the heat of the day strikes it, it withers away and dies before it bears fruit. And then there's the other one that's in the weed choke soil, right? When it grows, it starts to grow, but then the weeds choke it out and it dies before it bears any fruit. This is the idea here. Just because you're externally part of the covenant, just because you're Esau and you've been circumcised and you're a descendant of Abraham, does not make you internally part of the covenant. You've received the sign, but here we see by his actions, he is moving away from the presence of God. So now I'm going to do verses 9 through 43. This is going to sort of be a flyover, okay? I am not going to sit here and exegete every single name that I just read, okay? But I'm going to tell you what these verses kind of are trying to suggest here. And what I'm going to suggest here is titled by the second point here, A Legacy of Apostasy. Okay? This is the legacy of Esau. Okay? This is what people will know him for. And it's a legacy of apostasies we'll see here. So you've got a long list of names in these verses 9 through 43. I'm not going to read them again. I will focus on one name when I get to it. But it's a long list of names, and you've got this concept of, you got all these chiefs, and I don't mean the Kansas City Chiefs. These are different kinds of chiefs, right? In fact, I would say that these chiefs would probably beat the Kansas City Chiefs if it were like an actual battle, okay? I don't know about football, but maybe an actual battle. So you got a long list of chiefs, a long list of kings, many of whom are direct descendants of Esau. Now, I'm not quite sure, what kind of timeline we're looking at that is chronicled in these verses. My best guess is that you're seeing a timeline that takes you from the time of the patriarchs to the time of Moses. Okay, Moses is the author of Genesis, as he's the author of the whole Pentateuch, the primary author. And my guess is this genealogy takes us from the time of Abram, Isaac, Jacob, until the time of Moses, when Israel is about to go into the promised land and they've encountered the Edomites at this point. So this is, in a sense, part of what Moses is probably doing here is he's letting the children of Israel know, hey, those Edomites that we met on the road here? They're kind of your cousins, okay? But they're like the cousins that we don't invite to Christmas or weddings, right? You only see them at the funerals, right? That's the third circle, right? The funerals, right? Yeah. These aren't the cousins you invite to Christmas or weddings. That's kind of what Moses is doing here. Now, shrinking back down, verses 9 through 14, here we see a list of sons and grandsons of Esau. Now, of particular interest is this individual that you see in verse 12, where it says, Now Timnah was the concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. These were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. Now, why am I focusing on Amalek? Is anybody here, as you've read through the Bible, do you remember a group of people called the Amalekites? Okay. Do you know anything about the history? What do you know about the Amalekites? Anything? Are they good guys or bad guys? Do they wear white hats or black hats? They wear black hats. Okay. Well, the Amalekites became mortal enemies of God's people. The first place I want to take you to, so keep your place here in Genesis, and turn to Exodus 17. Now, these aren't the Edomites, these are the Amalekites, but they would be related because of how the family tree branches out. Amalek is a descendant of Esau, but he forms his own separate kind of tribe or people. So Exodus 17, I want to particularly look at verses 8 through 16. This is the first time you see the Amalekites. And this is on the way to Sinai. So, Israel's barely out of Egypt at this point. They haven't wandered for 40 years yet. They're just on their way to Sinai after crossing the Red Sea. And in verse 8 of chapter 17, now Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed, and when he let down his hands, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called its name, The Lord is my banner. For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war on Amalek from generation to generation. In case you want to know, that's Jehovah Nissi. The Lord is my banner. So because of this encounter, right, you get this promise from the Lord to Moses. I will utterly blot out the memory of the Amalekites. Okay? Now, in 1 Samuel 15, you don't need to turn there, but in 1 Samuel 15, who is the king of Israel at this point in time? I'll give you a hint. David doesn't get anointed king until chapter 16. Saul. Okay, there you go. Saul is king. Now, if you remember Saul, is Saul's God choice or the people's choice? He's the people's choice, right? So, if they had the People's Choice Awards back in the days of Samuel and Saul, Saul would be on the cover of People magazine. He'd be Man of the Year. He'd be on GQ because he was tall. He looked good. He was a warrior. He was supposedly like a head taller than everybody. Yet he still was dwarfed by Goliath. If you remember in chapter 17, he's like, right? So in 1 Samuel 15, King Saul is commanded to fulfill this promise that was given by the Lord to Moses. Go and destroy the Amalekites. And Saul goes out and he fights a great battle and he wins this battle and he wipes out most of the Amalekites. He keeps King Agag alive, and he keeps some of the cattle and everything, right? And he comes back, and Samuel comes back. This is kind of a funny story, because Samuel comes back, and apparently the cattle were lowing, right? The sheep are back there going, bah, bah, like sheep do. And Samuel's like, what's that I hear? It's like, is that the lowing of sheep? And Samuel turns to Saul and says, what part of destroy the Amalekites and everything that they own did you not understand, Saul? And because of that, then Samuel, speaking for God, says, the kingdom has been removed from you and will be given to another. And Saul starts to beg, it's like, I was keeping this as a sacrifice to the Lord, and so on and so forth. And then do you remember what else Samuel does? He hacks Agag to pieces, right? So Agag, the king of the Amalekites, is slaughtered by Samuel there. Now, who's the bad guy in the book of Esther? Haman, very good. Do you know what's special about Haman? You kind of see where I'm going with this here.
He's an Agagite.
He's an Agagite, right. Haman, who hated the Israelites, right? If you remember the story of Esther, Haman had this plot to wipe out Israel in the days of King Ahasuerus, I think is his name, one of the Persian kings. He has this great plot. He says, I'm going to wipe them out. I'm going to do what my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather couldn't do. I'm going to wipe out Israel. He's an Agagite, right? He's got that ancestral hatred of God's people. And of course, you know what happens to Haman, right? He gets, his plot gets discovered, and then he gets actually hung on the gallows that he built himself to hang the Israelites. So you've got this Agagite who's a descendant of Amalek, right? So you've got, one of the reasons I point this out is this is the legacy of Esau. Esau's legacy, part of it is the Amalekites, who hated God's people, who attacked God's people. And then you have descendants of Amalek, King Agag, and Haman. All of these are part of Esau's legacy, right? All of them are part of Esau's legacy. Now in verses 15, you can go back to Genesis 36. In Genesis, in verses 15 to 19, I believe, 15 to 19, you've got all these chiefs, okay? Now, there, the word for chief, think of as like a clan leader or a warlord, okay? These are warlike tribes, okay? We're not talking, chief like Indian Howe, right? No, we're talking a warlord, someone, a clan leader, someone who is leading a group of people. So you've got this list of clan leaders, this list of warlords in chapter 15 through 19. And the significance of this is going to be clear in just a moment. And then when you get to verses 20 to 30, you've got another list of chiefs, but this is a different group of people, as we see there in chapter 20, or verse 20. These were the sons of Seir, the Horite, who inhabited the land. Okay, so you've got these guys, the Horites. They're in the land. When Esau gets there, the land is occupied by a group of people called the Horites. And you've got their chiefs, their warlords, their clan leaders. Okay, you kind of see where I'm going with this here, right? I think what you got here is, through way of genealogy, you're seeing basically a hostile takeover of this region, right? It's just telling a little bit of the history of the region by giving you the genealogies. You've got the genealogy of Esau. You got the genealogy of this guy named Seir, the son of the Horites, and it's sort of like a tail of the tape. We've got my chiefs. I've got our chiefs. You got your chiefs, and then there's a battle, and the Horites apparently are wiped out, and Esau and his company move in and take over the land. It's a hostile takeover. Okay, it's a hostile takeover. How do I know this? Well, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 2, verses 12 and 22, we learn there, this is Moses telling the children of Israel what happened. He said, the Horites formerly dwelled in Seir, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them and destroyed them from before them and dwelt in their place, just as Israel did to the land of their possession, which the Lord gave them. Just as he had done for the descendants of Esau who dwelt in Seir when he destroyed the Horites from before them. They dispossessed them and dwelt in their place even to this day. So the reason for these genealogies here from the chiefs of Edom and then the sons of Seir is just to show, it's like you had an indigenous group of people. Esau came in, saw them, wanted the land, wiped them out, and took it over, right? So anybody who likes to say we're living on stolen lands, like, this has been the history of humanity ever since the very beginning. People have seen land that they wanted and tried to take it, and they fight. That's what humans do in a fallen world. Okay? We're no different. Just letting you show you here what's going on. And then verses 31 to 43, you've got another list of kings here, 31 through 39. You've got a list of kings. So this is to show you now, after wiping out the Horites, Edom, or Esau's family, comes in there, and they set up a kingdom and a dynasty. That's why you've got this list of kings who are in the land, and you almost see it kind of goes in a succession, right? So-and-so was king, and then the son reigned in his place, and then his son reigned in his place, and so on and so forth. So all these kings who reign in the land, having conquered the Horites, the Edomites established their own kingdom and dynasty in the region of Mount Seir. So what does all of this tell us about Esau and his legacy? Well, Esau lived up to his nature, and then that nature was passed on to his children, right? You know, we are products of our parents. What was Esau's character? Well, what does the Bible say about Esau? It says that he was a skillful hunter, right? A man of the field. He was a man's man. He was a hairy man's man, right? A very hairy man's man. He was a man of war. He was a warlike man based on Jacob's fear. You remember when Jacob was coming back into the land and he was fearful and he started sending all this tribute to his brother, and then the messengers came back and said, Esau's coming, he's got 400 men with him. And what was Jacob's thought? Oh, great, I'm going to get a welcome wagon. No, he's like, he's coming to kill me. That's exactly what Jacob thought, because that's the kind of man Esau was. He was a profane man. He despised his birthright. He had the right of the firstborn. Now we know the Lord said that the promise was going to go through Jacob. But Esau still, as the firstborn by, a few minutes, a few seconds, whatever the case may be, had the firstborn right, which meant that he had the right of the patriarchal blessing, which Jacob, of course, stole as well. But he despised his birthright. When he was hungry, right? He comes in, he's hungry, and Jacob's there making some stew, and he's like, give me the stew, I'm hungry. And he's like, sell me your birthright. He's like, birthright, schmirthright, I'm hungry, feed me now. So he was a profane man, despised his birthright. And then when Jacob stole his blessing, what did Esau do? Kind of cried like a little baby, right? Bless me too, Dad, please, don't you have another blessing for me? It's like, but he couldn't find room for repentance. Who are the kind of women that Esau married? Well, he married Canaanite women, right? 2 women who were Canaanites, and then the third one was Ishmael's daughter. He married outside of the covenant community, right? That's exactly what that means. He married outside of the church in a sense. And it was a pain in his parents, right? Isaac and Rebekah despised his wives. They irritated them. So you've got this is the kind of man Esau was. And then this gets passed on to his descendants, the Edomites. I want to look at another passage now. Numbers chapter 20. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Verses 14 through 21. Now again, this is about 400 years later than the time we're looking at in Genesis. But think about it. The Edomites, descendants of Esau. The Israelites, descendants of Jacob. Did the 2 brothers get along? No, they did not. What do you think the odds that their descendants would get along? Probably not very good. Well, here you go. Now, this is, when we saw the fight with the Amalekites, that was on their way to Sinai before the wandering. Now, when you get to Numbers chapter 20, they've wandered for 40 years already. They are now moving toward the promised land. The old generation is dead, with the exception of Moses and Aaron. I don't know if Miriam might be dead already by now. But the old generation is dead. The new generation is there, and they're on their way to the promised land. And as they go there, chapter 20, verse 14. Oh, Miriam dies at the beginning of the chapter. Okay, just so you know. So this chapter is bookended with the death of Miriam and the death of Aaron. Okay. Chapter 20, verse 14. Now Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom, Esau's descendants. Thus says your brother, See, he's referencing the nation of Israel as your brothers, right? We are related. You know all the hardship that has befallen us, how our fathers went down to Egypt, and we dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians afflicted us and our fathers. When we cried out to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent the angel and brought us up out of Egypt. Now here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your borders. Please let us pass through your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards, nor will we drink water from wells. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory. All right, sounds like a pretty legit request, right? We're on our way to the promised land, and the quickest route from here to there is to go through your land. Will you grant us passage? We won't eat anything. We won't drink your water. We'll stay on the road. We'll be good citizens. We'll pick up our trash, whatever the case may be, and we'll just move on. Then Edom said to him, you shall not, it's almost like Gandalf, right? Okay, I know a lot of people probably didn't see Lord of the Rings, but you shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with the sword. What was Esau? Skillful hunter, mighty man of war, right? Very warlike. It's like, here's a simple request. It's like, if you come here, I'm going to come at you with the sword. So the children of Israel said to him, we will go by the highway, and if I or my livestock drink any of your water, then I will pay for it. Let me only pass through on foot, nothing more. Then he said, you shall not pass through. So Edom came out against them with many men and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his territory. So Israel turned away from him. Doesn't sound like the brothers got along very well, right? It doesn't sound like their descendants got along very well either. In 2 Samuel 8:14, David is king now. And what does he do in there? He takes over the land of Edom and basically enslaves them, thus fulfilling the prophecy that was made by God all the way back when the children were still in the womb. The older shall serve the younger, right? So King David occupies the land of Edom and enslaves the Edomites. And then you have a whole entire book of the Bible. Now, it's not a big book. It's one chapter, but you have an entire book of the Bible, the prophet Obadiah, whose entire prophecy is against the Edomites and against the descendants of Saul, or Esau, I should say, right? So you've got this post-exilic prophet, Obadiah, who directs his entire prophecy against Edom and how they will be judged for the wickedness that they have done and how they treated Israel and so on and so forth. This is Esau's legacy. These are the lessons that he passed down to his descendants, and they passed down to their descendants, and so on and so on. You saw it here as they're trying to enter the promised land, and they asked to go through. It's like, no, if you come through, we're going to come out and kill you. It's like, but we're brothers, like, and not anymore, right? So we're going to come out and kill you. We see it in the history of God's people. When the fathers do not teach the younger generation, what happens? They will walk away from the Lord. You see that in the book of Judges when they come into the land, and it says that the first generation came into the land and they did all that the Lord had told them to do. Then the second generation did all that the Lord had told them to do, but they did not teach the third generation. And what happens to the third generation? They begin to turn away from the Lord. And then the Lord will have to send oppression, and then he sends judges to deliver them from their oppression. Esau walked away from the Lord. It happens here early on in chapter 36 when he packs up his family and moves away from the promised land, goes away from the land of promise, goes away from the presence of the Lord. He despised his birthright. He despised God's blessings, despised God's people. And it's a legacy of apostasy, as we see in the book of Obadiah, that ends in judgment. Let's go back now to the beginning of chapter 37, because we're coming up now to that last point. Dwelling in the land of pilgrimage. This is the last verse that deals with the generations of Isaac. And in chapter 37, verse 1, in contrast to what we saw with Esau, Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. It's just one verse, but it tells you what Jacob does, right? Whereas Esau left the land of promise, Jacob stayed there. He dwelt there. He remained there. And he remained in this land as a pilgrim, as a stranger, right? How much of the land did they own? The gravesite where, Abraham and Isaac and the wives are buried. That's the only part of the land they actually physically owned. Now, whereas Esau packed up his family to dwell east of Eden, Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger. That word stranger, in the Greek translation, the word used there is the same word Peter uses when he says in 1 Peter 2, verse 11, "Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul." Peter is using the same language in his epistle that is used here in the Exodus, right? Or not in the Exodus, in the wanderings of the patriarchs. The patriarchs dwelt in the land of promise as strangers. Peter is calling Christians strangers. He also calls us exiles, which points to Israel in exile in Babylon. So just as Abraham was in the land that was his, but he did not, he didn't dwell there. He moved around like a stranger, just as Israel in exile was in a land that was not her own. So too the Christian lives as a sojourner and a pilgrim. Esau went out to make a name for himself, whereas Jacob trusted in the Lord and his promises that he acknowledged when he came back to Bethel. If you remember when he came back in Genesis 35, after that horrific incident in chapter 34 with the rape of Dinah, his daughter, the Lord calls him back to Bethel. And when he comes there, he says to his family, "Let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me in the way which I have gone." So he recalls the promises of God to him. The God who said on his way out, "I will be with you, I will guard you, and I will bring you back." And surely the Lord has done that. And Jacob acknowledges that. Now, we all know Jacob was far from perfect, right? Was Jacob perfect? No. Was Jacob flawed? Very much so. Jacob was very much flawed. But he lived a life of faith, right? That's the point. It's not a measure of your faithfulness. It's a measure of your faith. Where is your faith in? Is your faith in God and his promises like Jacob, despite his flaws and his failures? Or is your faith like Esau or Lot, in what you could see with your eyes and what you could take with your hands like Esau does? The author of Hebrews makes a point of this in that great chapter 11, in verses 9 through 16, when he talks about the patriarchs. And it says, speaking of Abram, it says, "By faith he," that is Abraham, "dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith Sarah also herself received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him to be faithful who had promised. Therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore." Verse 13, "These all died in faith, not having received the promises." The land was promised to Abram, Isaac, Jacob. They dwelt in the land as strangers. They did not see the fulfillment of the promise. When was that promise fulfilled? In the days of Joshua, when they actually took the land over with God's help, right? "But having seen them from afar, were assured of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrim on the earth." Jacob here, right? He dwells in the land where his father was a stranger. "For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them." What kept the patriarchs going? It wasn't so much the promise of the land. as much as that was promised to them. It was the promise of a heavenly country, a better city, a city whose foundations is not made by hands. So, Esau, he is the poster child, if you will, of a life of apostasy, a life lived away from God. Jacob is the poster child of a life lived by faith, despite his flaws, despite his failings. Neither one was perfect, and I would dare say there are times when Jacob actually seemed worse than his brother Esau. All right, Esau did not ask to be cheated of his blessing, right? Of the patriarchal blessing. That was Jacob, and of course his mother's plotting as well. But as I said earlier, the point is not that we are saved by faithfulness. We're saved by faith. Faith which grasps and holds on to those promises. Of course, Jesus Christ, who is not just the son of Abraham and the son of David, he's also the son of Jacob, right? The son of Judah, the son of all those people in that line. Jesus Christ came not to save righteous people. He came to save the wicked. He came to save the unrighteous. He came to save sinners, right? As he likes to say in many places, I came not, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, it's those who are sick. And the problem is, no one's healthy, everyone is sick. and it's those who know they're sick that go to the doctor. Well, Jesus didn't come to save the righteous, he came to save sinners like Jacob, sinners like Esau, but Esau was not saved, sinners like you, sinners like me. One final passage I want to look at, and that's Romans 9. Esau demonstrates, as I said earlier, that you can be externally in the covenant but not have the blessings of the covenant. In other words, he demonstrates the truth that they are not all Israel who are of Israel. And that's what you see here in Romans chapter 9, starting in verse 6, going to verse 13. But it is not that the word of God has taken no effect. For they are not all Israel who are of Israel, nor are they all children because they are the seed of Abraham. But in Isaac your seed shall be called. That is, those who are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as the seed. For this is the word of promise. At this time I will come, and Sarah shall have a son. And not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one man, even by our father Isaac, for the children not yet being born, nor having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him who called, it was said to her, the older shall serve the younger. As it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. They are not all Israel who are of Israel. That's the point, and Esau shows that. It's not that Esau's like, I want to be of Israel. What was Esau like? A profane man. Esau despised his birthright. Esau sought the blessing even though he couldn't have it. Esau was a profane, violent, angry man, right? His life demonstrates the fact that he lived away from God, even though he had access to all of the blessings, being in the promised land, being part of the covenant people. Being the son of Isaac couldn't save Esau any more than being born in a Christian home can save your children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren. We are all saved by grace through faith in Christ, and that grace is God's free choice to bestow upon those, as he'll say later on in Romans, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. So that is the life of Esau. That is his legacy that we see here from these verses here in chapter 30.